Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's 54 degrees out. This is part of our Jefferson report, and there's about, 2 to 5 miles of wind. And that's it, and that's the end of my Jefferson report. So it's a beautiful day out. The leaves are almost gone. There are wonderful patterns. I've always loved following patterns in nature and elsewhere. And those of you who've ever messed around with fractals, which is taking a seed and then causing iterations to follow from that seed, creates the most amazing and decorous visions. But in life, we have these things. We don't have to make them up. They're here, and there are those that would destroy them. I am, as much as I've seen and known in my own life, astonished at how little reasonable discussion we have on many issues. And maybe it's a simplistic analysis, but I take it back to how we create an order, a template of right behavior in a society by a consensus, which really comes out of legislation or constitutions or rules of behavior. And the system has broken down. People don't feel, many people don't feel they have to explain themselves, that they have to give reason, R-E-A-S-O-N, rather than belief for what they're doing. And belief is a way of just saying, that's what I believe in, that's what I want to do, but your right to do that ends at the tip of my nose. And when you go past that point, then that's where the breakdown occurs. And when the law is not enforced against everyone, then you have the chaos. And I've repeated before, Sir Thomas More, talking to his son-in-law, who talks about taking down all the law, and More says to him, in approximate words as I remember them, that sure, you're just the kind of person who would take down all the laws, and they're man's laws, not God's laws, and how could you stand in the wind that would blow? And that's what we're dealing with. Not the wind that I occasionally have when I'm walking, but the wind that literally tears apart a civilization, destroys it. So those who speak out on what they think is right or wrong about how to handle the Middle East and who's doing the right or the wrong thing, there is no debate about it. People have taken their positions and they won't move. And who's right and wrong, it's beside the point. And how far back does this analysis go? Does it go back to 1917, 1947, 1948? Some quote the Genesis in the Bible as if that makes or breaks a land deal. And now I've said something that will probably piss off some people. But the point is, we have to get a grip, and we don't have one. And I listen to the talking heads on Sunday if I can. In the background, I'm devoted. But an interesting phenomenon is happening in our election cycle, which is another place where the rules are not applied. After all, consider the fact that the principal Republican that's running is a man that tried to overturn an election by strength and deception, by bullying, by having people commit crimes. And he's since indicted for it. And if some are telling me that the polls indicate that the nation prefers him, what kind of people has this nation become? That we will want a criminal in the White House, a known criminal? Now, some of us believed that when he ran in 2016. But what about now? So, what is the pattern by which a party that does not have majority vote, how do they get to power? And at the outset, I think we should consider what they did to Kerry, swift voting, what they did to Hillary, same thing, what they're doing to Biden. But that's not the only thing. The other thing that they're doing is that they're trying to stock the battleground states, particularly with candidates that they hope will diminish the ability to win that campaign except with a plurality, meaning less than a majority. And when Trump begins with, 40-something%, if he can get that, by diminishing the winning margin of a plurality in the battleground states, would give him the electors to win the election again. So when we don't pay attention to the game that's going on, instead of a simple election, then we are all contributing by our passivity to another set of crimes by Trump and his corrupt minion. Now, are there good news stories to be told? Well, there are winds of peace in the air. And the first thing that I can think of is, of course, in the Middle East. Cross your fingers that peace may break out, and that the efforts to have 5-day pauses on fighting and some hostages transferred will bring us to a better place. Now, Biden, in today's Washington Post, has written an editorial, and he has given an opinion piece that says, let's not just stay the war. Let's find a solution so that there is no war, that we end this violence and this fight back and forth. Is that possible? I don't know, but it's a better sentiment than what we've been hearing in the days before this. And Biden does have the content and the experience to talk about foreign affairs as a former chair of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate. And we should respect that fact as compared to any of the other people who would be president who don't have that ability. We have commentators feeding this story. Again, think of Kerry, Hillary, Biden, feeding this story that, Biden, he can't do it, and you don't know what he's doing, and he's older, and so on and so forth. There are men and women half his age who can't possibly do what he's been doing at a man his age. Why can't we accept the fact that he comes to us fit and wise, combinations that are hard to find in American public life, and we put him down for it? Now, sometimes you can do less work to spread propaganda. And I think in Biden's case, and less so in Trump's, because he's only a couple of years younger than Biden, the setting for this argument is a society that, like many other prejudices, has one specifically set on this point: ageism. That the society makes fun of older people, doesn't respect them, that it doesn't want them working in their businesses, and a whole variety of things that sets up an attack on Biden like the different ones used on Kerry and Hillary. And so we have to be aware of that, and we have to ask ourselves, who would substitute for Biden? Why are they fighting so hard against Biden? Same reason they fought against Biden in the 2020 election. Because he's a winner. They know he can win, and he can administer, and he can once and for all put a stop to the monarchy that evil Trump would have. So that's the thing here. Now, let's take a specific example, which is a terrible one, and it's the Robert Kennedy candidacy, running as an independent in a general election, having given up the Democratic primary he was working on to run in the general election. Now, I thought Robert F. Kennedy Jr., not his dad, was a kind of person who in his public life would follow upon his successes having to do with the environment. But somewhere along the way, he took a road less traveled by all politicians and started being concerned about, all sorts of crazy ideas. Now, they have forecast him as getting something like 20 percentage points. So the second point that I'm getting at is not only is this campaign by the Republicans to smear and diminish the credibility of Biden, but it is to stock the swamp with people who would make the voting unpredictable. Okay, so how do they do that? Well, if Trump figures, I can only win if I get 40% of plurality vote in the battleground states. So what do? I do everything I can to diminish the vote against me by persons of color, by women, etc. And then I get other candidates into the race, like RFK Jr., who maybe he gets this vote, not enough vote to win, so he doesn't matter. And who's he taking the vote from? Well, how much can you take away from the base of Trump in which then Biden wins? And that's obviously going to be the strategy. But we also hear on the line that Manchin may run. Why else did he retire from the Senate? And he gave an interview, one I heard today, in which he basically said, well, Biden knows how I disagree with him. And he says he's not a spoiler. No, he's only get the votes that only he would get and that Biden wouldn't get. Foul. That's not the way it works. And we have other people that they're moving into the race to take bits and pieces of the vote so that they force a victory in a plurality election in which almost the only thing that matters is the electoral votes that you get as a result of winning in the battleground states. Now let's go back to RFK Jr. again. I had the luck to spend a day with Robert Kennedy, the original, the man who gave his life for his country, a country that didn't appreciate what he meant to the country, because a friend of mine was one of his speechwriters, a very precocious fellow, T.R. Ellis, a brilliant young man. And we spent time with him then, and we saw who the father was. And when I worked on Ted Kennedy's campaign, I got to know Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, and I'm very grateful for the support that she gave me when I ran for Congress. And Ethel Kennedy opened up their home for a fundraiser. People who hated me contributed. But here's the line drawn, and the reason I mention this is because as much as family means, as close as the family Kennedy has been, you have his siblings against him. And he lies. It's like he's taken on the coloration of the Trumpites. And what was his lie? Well, the question by a reporter was, do any of your siblings support me? Yeah, Max does. And so the reporter dutifully talks to Max, and Max says, no, nothing of the sort. And his other siblings, Rory, Kerry, and Joseph, they all are against his candidacy and against the propositions and statements he's making. And he, that is RFK Jr., is predicting he'll get 34% of the vote in the battleground states. Isn't that an announcement that he's only in as a spoiler? Now, has anybody done an analysis of his funds or associates or anything like that? I don't know, because you see, some journalism, not all of it, looks for the shiny objects. And a million years ago, when I hung out at WFUV, Fordham University's voice in New York City, at 90.7 on your FM dial, and that information is still correct. Whoever was on the air would sometimes, him or herself, run down the hallway to the AP machine, tear off the stories, and go back to the studio and read that as the news. So there's rip and read, they call that. And too much of the modern stories are combinations of two things. Rip and read the shit you get from these people, and then extrapolating from something that may already be a lie and terribly misleading to something else. Now, do all do it? No, there's an overwhelming population of good newsmen and women, commentators, And we're lucky to have them. And it's all First Amendment stuff. These people care about it. And one of the people I like the best, as you know, is Ari Melber. And he has a background in the First Amendment. He's particularly sensitive to these questions. And he has a team that does a lot of homework. And it's one of the reasons I like appearing on his show, because I think the truth does matter. The truth leaps out at you. And that is our sole source of moving on. And if we're not going to write investigative stories about what's behind the actual pattern of misconduct to steer this election away from what might be an honest representation of what the voters want to a victory lap for autocrat, well, Trump, what else can you do? So what is our job? Our job is to say, we're not being fooled, we know this shit, give us the truth and stop this, because you're putting our entire nation at risk. And people have said that maybe at every election that I've lived through since my birth, even before I could vote. And somehow now it's worse than ever. And it's because at no time through any demonstration I saw or was close to, I never saw anything like January 6th in America. And the fact that it happened, and that it appears to be a warm-up for more violence and more misconduct, because they believe they're right. That's the thing. Belief, not reason. So, sorry I can't give an upbeat statement today, but I was really taken aback by how commentators and the talking heads on Sunday are buying the swill of the Republicans without analysis. And what they're doing is they're making the case of voting harder. We're not choosing a rock band or the latest hip-hop song. We're not choosing an athlete, which is more reasonable. It's hard to cheat when you're running against a clock or the amount of weight or whatever your sport requires. And politics has so many places where you can put your thumb on the scales, and that's how Republicans choose to get elected. Democrats choose to organize people who are like-minded to vote. Is there anything wrong with those two strategies? I think the Republican strategy is criminal. So, that's what I have to say in my cathedral of trees, and work and weather permitting, I'll be out again tomorrow.